Hi, welcome to the DRH show, where I have wide-ranging conversations with fascinating people. We talk about all things psychology, mental health, and wellness. And today I'm joined by a professor of philosophy at Wright State University. He's the author of Stoic Challenge, Dr. William Irvine. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you here, Dr. Irvin. So let's start off with you telling us your background, your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Okay. I live in Ohio, in the heartland of the United States. I grew up in the Western United States, mostly in small towns, lived for a time in Chile, in South America. So a very interesting way to grow up. And everybody can say that about their childhood, but I was exposed to all sorts of things that I think did a good job of preparing me for my later life. Went to college at University of Michigan, at which I never went to a single football game. You know, it's famous for its football games. I preferred to hang out in the library instead. Went to graduate school at UCLA and ended up with a doctorate in philosophy. Then struggled for a few years to find a job. That's one of the standard things if you're going to be a philosopher. Finding a job can be challenging. Ended up in Dayton, Ohio, with a tenure track position at Wright State University. And it's beginning to look like I've been there for 38 years now. It looks like this will be my last year because they've done a buyout and are encouraging people to retire, are rewarding people to retire. And I did the math on this, and I figured it would actually cost me in terms of pension to continue to teach. And anyway, I still will be teaching because besides the classroom teaching, I do teaching through the books that I write. And let's see, early 2000s, I was in the middle of what looks like some kind of low-grade life crisis, and I decided I was going to become a Zen Buddhist. And being an academic, I decided that I was going to not only become a Zen Buddhist, but write a book about what I learned in the process of becoming a Zen Buddhist. So you get two things for the price of one. You get the self-transformation and you get a publication. So that went on to become the book on Desire, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2004 or 2006, maybe. And in the process of writing that book, the strangest thing happened because I went in thinking I was going to become a Zen Buddhist, but in doing the research, I had to look at alternative philosophies of life, and one of them was Stoicism. And I gave Stoicism a good hard look and decided that, strangely enough, it has the same kind of grand goal in living as Zen Buddhism does, but a radically different way of getting to that goal. And in particular, you know, if you're going to be a Zen Buddhist, you're going to do lots of meditation. You're going to do other exercises. As a Stoic, they were the preeminent psychologists of their time. They came up with very easy to use strategies for reducing the number of negative experiences, negative emotions that you experience, and for maximizing the number of positive emotions you experience. Negative emotions, those are the ones that feel bad. Emotions like anger, like frustration, like anxiety, like envy. The positive emotions, those are the ones that feel good. For instance, feelings of delight, these little things that can be scattered through your day if you're open to them. Feelings of joy, a sense of awe, those are all wonderfully positive emotions. And the Stoics also came up with ways to maximize them. So out of that experience came a book on the Stoics. The book is Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy, which I imagined would sell like a dozen copies because there just weren't any Stoics around. There were a few, there were a handful around, and I assumed that it would sell maybe a dozen copies, but it's gone on to do very well. So it's published in 2008, and it is still holding up very well in the market. And then more recently, 2 years ago, I published a book called The Stoic Challenge, which you can think of as applied Stoicism. So It's not an introduction to the whole philosophy, but it's just this kind of focused project. And that is, what did the Stoics say about how best to deal with life's setbacks? And that brings me to where I am today.
Brilliant. Now, Dr. Irvine, let's just dig deeper to what you're known for. Your work in Stoicism, you're recognized for that. But some of us may not be familiar about the philosophy behind Stoicism. I myself, I have this notion of Stoics being flat affect, no emotion. Can you please tell us what it is and what it isn't? And also, I know that some philosophers such as yourself, you make a distinction between an uppercase Stoic and a lowercase Stoic. So if you could just tell us more about that.
Yeah. So when I went to college, this would have been in 1970. I encountered Stoics. I was a philosophy major, one of the majors, and I encountered the Stoics, but I encountered them in a logic class, not in a philosophy class, because it turns out that they were some of the people who did the most to develop what's known as propositional logic. And that's the kind of logic that makes computers and your cell phone work, if, then, and, or that kind of logic. But in the philosophy department, they thought that the Stoics' advice on how to live a good life, that simply wasn't the proper business of philosophers, that we should worry about deep, profound questions that can probably never be answered. So I came out, even though I was exposed to Stoics, I came away with the standard idea that a lot of people have, and that is that these are just these grim, glum people who bottle up their emotions and stand there and grimly take whatever life has to throw at them. And then when I started doing research for the Stoics, I found that it was 180 degrees the opposite of that. So the Stoics, strangely enough, in the ancient world, had a reputation for being cheerful individuals. And, that's kind of, given what I said a few minutes ago, that's maybe what you would expect, because they figured out ways to deal with their negative emotions. And they dealt with them not by suppressing them, not by keeping them bottled up, but by not even experiencing them to begin with. So there was nothing to bottle up. And they also worked on developing their ability to savor the positive emotions that life had to offer. So it became clear when I was writing A Guide to the Good Life that I had to distinguish, that I had to tell readers, okay, here's a perception that you're going to come in with, and that is that the Stoics were these emotionless creatures, and that's just wrong. So I distinguish between lowercase s Stoics. Those are the people who are just glum and indifferent to what's going on and unemotional. And then what I call uppercase s Stoics, and that is the Stoicism in the sense that the ancient Stoics, people like Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Musonius Rufus, the way they did it. So it wasn't about bottling up your emotions. It was about preventing negative emotions. And again, the key thing is if you prevent them, there's nothing to bottle up. And isn't that brilliant? They also had this profound insight that when life sets you back, as happens, some setbacks are tiny, some setbacks are much larger. But when life sets you back, the thing that does you the most harm isn't the setback itself. It's the negative emotions triggered by the setback. So if you are carrying a cup of tea across the room and you accidentally drop it, the biggest problem, the biggest cost of that episode is not the broken teacup. They're easy to replace. It's going to get your day going in the wrong direction, and you're going to spend the rest of the day sort of upset, sort of angry. And so they kind of realized if you want to get through life and want to be a happy, well-adjusted individual, you prevent negative emotions. And when life does deal you a setback, you deal with it in a way that won't trigger negative emotions.
Now, Dr. Irvine, I came across your work on Stoicism from the California Cognitive Science Conference. And of course, the theme of that conference is resilience. But how would you differentiate resilience from Stoicism?
Resilience is one of so there are certain traits you want to develop if you're a Stoic, and resilience is one of those traits. I mean, there are other traits, a willingness to look for silver linings because they're almost everywhere. It's just that most people refuse to see them. They imagine they can't be there, and so they don't even bother to look for them. Another is resilience, and that is when you're dealt a setback, there's two options. You can break or you can bounce, and a lot of people break, and it's really sad because you see them experiencing one significant setback in their life and they never recover from it. They're broken human beings after that. The Stoics, and this is the strategy I describe in my most recent book, The Stoic Challenge. The Stoics regard setbacks as a kind of challenge. And so it just changes your mental attitude and your approach to it entirely. If you see it as a punishment of some kind that you don't deserve, you're just going to be beat up by it, and you're going to be saddened by it, and you're going to wallow in self-pity as a result. But if you see it as a challenge, then, game on. Okay, so this is a challenge. I'm going to show what I'm made of in doing this, because first thing is I'm going to find a workaround for the setback. I'm going to find a way, and it's going to be a good way to get my life back on track. And the second thing is I'm not going to let myself get miserable in the process of doing that. So I describe this kind of imaginative thing you can think of. This is a psychological device. And I mentioned before that the Stoics were the preeminent psychologists of their day. Maybe I didn't mention that, but they were, and they had these great insights. And so, and it was Seneca in particular who came up with this particular line. And it is that when you're set back as a kind of a mental game, you imagine that it's these Stoic gods who are responsible. It isn't the coworker who lost the files and everything else. You imagine instead, no. There's this higher plan, and that is the Stoic gods wanted to test me. And so the coworker who lost the files, he's just a lackey. He's just doing their work. And so then the follow-up question is, few follow-up questions. One is, do they actually think these gods exist? Well, the Stoics, back in the ancient world, everybody thought the gods exist. That was just common sense. Do I personally think the Stoic gods do exist? No, not really. But it's a really wonderful psychological device. And so follow-up question, why would they do this to you? Is it because they're angry at you and want to punish you? No, it's the exact opposite. It's because they want to strengthen you. They want you to be resilient. And they know that the worst thing that can happen to a human being is to go through a life where the person is pampered every single day, because that person will have no resilience at all. Better thing is to be tested, pushed, challenged. If you're in sports, a good coach will do what? A good coach won't sit around telling you how wonderful you are and how you don't have to work out today and how the other teams are just mean. A good coach is going to push you hard, is going to find in you things you never thought existed within you, and is going to take your performance to another level by doing that. So the Stoic gods are that way. If you experience setbacks, that's a sign that they like you. I mean, I know this sounds backwards. If they were indifferent to you, what would they do? They would just make sure you never had a setback. But that sounds like really good, except you are going to be so soft that then the smallest little thing is going to seem to you like a huge setback. In the world, you can look around you and people who are living in third world circumstances, they tend to be quite happy in some sense or embrace the life they're living. And then you take somebody from industrial countries, somebody who's wealthy, used to air conditioning, used to indoor plumbing, used to all of this good stuff, and then the smallest things, and you talk to them and it's like, wow, this person has really let his life be turned upside down by what? Oh, his refrigerator stopped working, right? So you want to be challenged. You want somebody pushing you, because that will keep you a resilient human being, and that's a very good skill to have.
That's a lovely message, Dr. Irvin, and I could actually, I could actually relate to that. Not to sound melodramatic, but I actually grew up in the slum in the Philippines before I moved
Oh,
to Britain, so I can perfectly relate to what people would call like a first world problem. You know, like when in this society, a lot of people are complaining about not using the proper pronouns. I would
yes.
love to tell to these people in the other side of the world where I grew up, we don't have running water or electricity.
Right.
And
Right.
the use of proper pronouns is the least that we could actually think about. But here's my question to you, Dr. Irvin. I actually want to touch upon the important point that you raise about. You mentioned that we should not really wallow in self-pity, but we kind of live in a society now that kind of encourages victim mentality. There's actually a market for victimhood in the society that we live now, and by that I mean Western society. So can Stoicism help us with this?
Yes, if we could transport the Stoics, people like Seneca, people like Epictetus, forward in time to today, it would take a while to introduce them to the culture. But one of the things that would absolutely astonish them is the way we're pampering people, and we're taking people who are the targets of injustice, or who are the targets of discrimination, and we're giving them permission to wallow and to play the role of victim. So a Stoic would say, you may not have control over whether somebody treats you unfairly. You know, if it's a powerful person, you may not have it in your control whether or not they do that. But you have it entirely in your control what role you want to play in psychological terms. And two options are open to you. Is you can play the role of target. What does that mean? That means there's somebody out there who's ignorant, probably hateful, who has taken a disliking to you, and who is out to ruin your day and maybe ruin your life as well for terrible reasons. You're the target of that. Now, second question, independent question. Okay, you're a target. Are you also going to be a victim? Because victimhood allows for a certain kind of behavior. It allows you to simply say, oh, somebody help me. I've been victimized, and it's so terrible, and it's so unfair, and I deserve better. The Stoics would say that of those two roles that you can play, you are much better off, psychologically speaking, and in terms of your well-being, your psychological well-being, to play the role of target. As soon as you allow yourself to play the role of victim, you're going to be a miserable human being, and you might end up a broken human being. So if we could flash them forward in time and say, okay, what should we do about hate speech? Their reply is, well, we should teach people to shrug it off. We should teach people to laugh it off. We should teach people to be indifferent to it. And it really is interesting. You get into conversations with people about this. Actually, there's a third Stoic book I did. It's basically Stoic, but it's about insults. And the book is called A Slap in the Face, where I talk about the different ways you can respond to an insult. The worst thing you can do in response to an insult is let it get under your skin and let it hurt you, because that's precisely what the person who unleashed the insult wanted to do. He knew the insult was just words, but he knew that if he got under your skin, it would unleash a flood of negative emotions, and you would toss and turn at night. Not only tonight, not only tomorrow night, not only the night after that, but maybe years later. It's really amazing. And I've encountered elderly people who have, by the aging process, have been deprived of much of their memory, and yet they can still tell you in detail something insulting someone said to them decades before. Okay, so plan B for all of this would be, if somebody insults you, I mean, one thing you can do is simply carry on as if nothing had been said. Turns out to be a really effective way to respond to an insult, because the insulter wants to wreck your day. And so you just carry on as if nothing had been said. And sometimes the person will wonder, gee, did he hear me? And they'll say it again, in which case you can say, actually, I heard you the first time. And then just carry on as if nothing had happened. Or better still, and this takes a little bit of cleverness on your part, make a joke about the thing you're insulted about. So in one of the books I've described this, if somebody picks out a certain character trait of yours and insults you about that character trait, one comeback is, if that's the worst thing you can say about me, you really don't know me well enough to be insulting me. You're an amateur in doing this. So if that's all you got, I'm not interested in hearing it. To laugh off an insult is a profound defense, the ability to laugh off an insult, because you've not only not fallen victim to this person's behavior, but you've made this person look like a fool, right? He hit you with his best shot, and you just laughed it off. One interesting thing is, so among the Stoics, for instance, Epictetus was a student of Musonius Rufus. These were both Roman Stoics, first AD. And Musonius Rufus is the least well-known of the top four Roman Stoics: Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and Musonius Rufus. He was the teacher of Epictetus, and used to, in the classroom, in his lectures, call Epictetus slave. How come? Well, because Epictetus had been an actual slave, had been enslaved. Not only that, but he had been beaten by his master severely enough that he was lame as a result of the beating. So he was a lame slave. So here he shows up in Musonius Rufus's classroom, wanting to get his life back on track. So why would Musonius refer to him as slave? The answer is because it's just words. And one of the most important things that somebody like Epictetus needs to learn is words are just words. They're just air. And another analogy I give for this is, if somebody engages in hate speech, one way for you to prevent it from hurting you is to think of that person as the human equivalent of a barking dog. Now, a lot of people who engage in hate speech do come from unfortunate backgrounds and have had difficult upbringings, and are themselves victims in some sense. But you know what? If you're out for a walk and a dog starts barking at you and you let it ruin your day, it's on you. It's just a barking dog. And if a racist comes up and does the same thing, you can give the same response. It's a human equivalent of a barking dog. And I'm the biggest fool on the planet if I let that person ruin my day. What should I do? Just ignore him the way you would ignore a barking dog.
Okay, now here's my question for you, Dr. Irvine. In a perfect world, it would really be incredible if people respond to insults with elegance by just shrugging it off. But unfortunately, just like what I've mentioned earlier, we now live in an era of social media where people become reactionary, and you get all sorts of you get into trouble by responding to those reactions. So my question to you is, do you think Stoics get into trouble by conveying that message that we should just, shrug it off and just, respond to insults with elegance? Because, we live in a culture now which really, cultivates cancel culture and taking offense.
Yeah. So I've been criticized for taking the line I take, and that's okay. I'm making the claim that if we could bring the Stoics forward in time and ask them, what do we need to do about this hate speech? I'm pretty sure I'm telling you what they would say. And that raises an interesting question. Okay, but is what they said right? Is that true? Well, we're going to find out because we're in the middle of this big social experiment, and we have two ways to do it. We can toughen up and learn to shrug it off, or we can wallow in it. And we'll know 10 years, 20 years from now, we'll know the outcome of the experiment. Unfortunately, it isn't on lab animals, it's on real human beings who could be very much affected by it. Second thing about social media is avoid it. Social media brings out the worst in human beings. It really does. And, something like Twitter requires you to take what could be a nuanced thought and boil it down into, what is it, 160 characters.
Mhm.
And if you express outrage in your tweet, then it'll get retweeted and you'll have a metric and you can say, oh, look at this, look at how I've affected the world. So I have largely dodged social media. I've watched in my own college, we had, when the internet came along, so this would be in the early 2000s, and faculty started being given computers and people started doing email. And there was this one faculty listserv where faculty members could send out things that other faculty would read and share and reply to. And it was amazing how quickly it turned ugly. So these would be PhD, in a variety, in physics and humanities and everything else. But the name calling started pretty quickly. And that's when I grew suspicious. But now, of course, those would be even colleagues, people who maybe were down the hall, had offices down the hall. But now it's a completely anonymous people. And so you float stuff out there, and there's people who are bored, and they think, you know what? One thing I could do today is find people to attack. Oh, and by attacking them, I'm showing my moral virtue. I'm showing I have no tolerance for what they're doing. So best thing is just avoid them. Just stay far away. And I have friends that I've given that advice to, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, you know what I read on the internet today? And then they'll tell me something outrageous, and I'll tell them, hey, avoid the internet. And you know what? If you drink water out of the toilet bowl, don't come to me afterwards complaining about the bad taste in your mouth.
Mhm.
Just avoid doing that to begin with.
Mhm. Now, let's move on to another of your book. You mentioned it earlier. You've written a book entitled On Desire, where you said that happiness is impossible unless we can learn how to control our desires. Can you please expand on that, about controlling our desires?
Yeah. So one thing I'm going to do is revisit something we touched on earlier. And you said you described you coming from the Philippines and the life you had lived compared to the life you're living now. One thing to realize is anybody in the audience, you are living somebody's dream life. You are living somebody's dream life. There are poor people in the world. There are people who get by on $2 a day. There are people who have dirt floors in their dwellings. There are people who don't have dwellings. You can walk. There are people who can't walk. You can talk. There are people who can't talk. You can hear and see. There are people who can't. There are people who would love to be living the life you're living. So isn't that incredible? You're living the dream life. The snag is, it's not your dream, it's someone else's dream. Okay, what's your dream? If only I had X amount more income, finally I would be a happy, content human being. So it's ironic and it's tragic, but everyone has the idea of the dream life. And unfortunately, everybody thinks if only they had a different life, they would be happy, and they don't. So at this point, just in terms of wanting, so I described how I was interested in Zen Buddhism, and I looked at broader Buddhism. I looked at a variety of the thoughts that were floating around 2,000 plus years ago. And one constant theme, certainly that you can find in Buddhism, but you can find elsewhere, what is the cause of human unhappiness and human suffering? Well, unfulfilled desires. And so we have There's what we have and there's what we want. Okay. If what we want is substantially above what we have, it creates a gap between the two of them, and we're unhappy. Okay. So there are two ways to close the gap. Close the gap and you will be happy. One way to close the gap is to raise what you have to the level of what you want. Okay. I got what I want, so I'm happy. Yeah, you are. You are for a day or two, maybe a week, and then you're right back to where you were before because now you found something new to want. And so the gap reopens. The Buddha, and the Stoics and a bunch of other people realized there's a second way to close the gap. Instead of getting the thing you want the thing you already have. See that? Want the thing you already have. Gap closed. Happiness. So whatever life you're living, embrace the life. And you may say, well, it's not perfect. Right. But embrace your life as it is and realize there's somebody somewhere who would love to be living your life. And here you are living that life, and yet you don't appreciate it. We humans are so easily, we just get so bored and so tired of whatever it is we've got, when in fact we've got a lot. The trick is appreciating the things we've already got. And then your world can seem strangely fulfilling. Yeah, you've got relationships. You've got a roof over your head. You've got clean water to drink. And you can go through the list, and there's a whole bunch for you to be thankful for. But most humans don't do that. They think, geez, there's a new kind of car. And if only I had that. That would be it. Seriously, I would be happy forever and ever. Except that they wouldn't. They would get the car, and then the process would start over. So they're like people on a desert on a hot summer day, looking off in the distance. They're thirsty. They're dying of thirst, looking off in the distance, and they see what looks like a pool of water, and they cross the desert and finally get there. It was a mirage, vanishes. Oh, but look over there further. There's another what looks like a pool of water. And so they go across the desert in a hopeless manner. And that's how most people get through life with respect to desires. A desire pops into their head. They don't want to desire it. They just notice that they do. They work really hard to get it. And then a new desire pops into their head. And so they spend their whole life chasing mirages.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to share to you something personal, Dr. Irvine. When you told me that I'm living the dream, someone else's dream, I actually have a picture of the slum where I grew up in the Philippines. I have it framed. It's just that's the first thing that I see in the morning. It's just to remind myself to be grateful because I'm not rich here in Britain, but I live a completely different life. It's just to remind myself of that. But what would you say to young people who will argue with what you said, that it's really difficult to control your desires if you're just starting to chase your dreams?
Yeah, let me respond also to your picture of your house. I mentioned that I lived in Chile, in South America, and we were in what was called the American colony. So we had okay houses, not great houses by American standards, but good houses by Chilean standards. And I remember leaving my house for school one morning and seeing two Chilean kids my age eating out of my garbage can. And, realizing I would have been 6 years old, but realizing that, it's luck of the draw that the roles weren't reversed, that they were living in this house, that I was eating out of the garbage can. But you talk to somebody who says, that's the interesting thing about desires is they pop into your head. You don't wake up one morning saying, let's see, my to-do list. Oh, look at this. At 9 a.m., I'm supposed to fall in love with Susie, or whoever, or John, or Bob, or whoever. What happens is at 9 o'clock that morning, you might discover that you've fallen in love with this other person. You didn't get to choose that you were going to fall in love. You didn't get to choose with whom you were going to fall in love, but there it is. So I mentioned my interest in Zen, and there's one thing, even if you don't become a Zen Buddhist, there's one thing you can do is try what's called the Zazen meditation. I give you the speeded up version of it here, but You simply spend 5 minutes trying to empty your mind of thoughts, and you'll find how brutally difficult that is to do, because thoughts keep popping into your mind. Many of them are desires. And you can ask, where do they come from? It's not your rational mind. It's some deep source, and it's influenced by advertisements you've seen, what you've seen other people wearing, owning, doing. And this deep, mysterious source, if you let it, can control your life. Or another plan, this is the Stoic plan, instead of just focusing on these things, when you notice a desire in your head, make sure that on an ongoing basis, you're very consciously thinking about the things you've already got, and thinking about how you would feel if you didn't have the things you've already got. This is what's called negative visualization among the Stoics. Because by doing that, you can learn to really embrace the life you're living. If something else comes along, well, okay, that's interesting. But I actually had enough before, and now I still have enough. And that's a trick to having a happy life, is want the things you've already got, because you've already got them, and they are quite valuable. It's just that you've gotten used to them, and so you don't fully appreciate them.
Now, Dr. Irvine, I'm generally interested in your books, The Stoic Challenge and On Desire, but I was just wondering if it's written for those of us who don't have a background in philosophy.
Yes, that's the perfect reader. You've never taken a philosophy class. You don't know anything about philosophy. You maybe even think philosophy is something you cannot possibly bring yourself to understand. And there are some kinds of philosophy that's true of. But the Stoics, here's another way to put it. One component of their writing is concerned with psychology. So you should think of it in those terms. And so when I describe Stoicism to somebody, they say, well, like, is it deep, like existentialism, or Marxism or whatever? And I say, no, it's like psychology. What the Stoics do is they come up with workable strategies you can use in everyday life that will have a profound impact on how happy and satisfied you are in whatever life you happen to be living. And so think of it in psychological terms. They give you tips for living, tips for good living. And so that's very much different than a lot of philosophy is. So if you've never experienced philosophy, never been exposed to it, take a look at these books.
Now, what I'll do, Dr. Irvine, is I'll put a link to your book. So for anyone who wants to explore Stoicism, they could grab a copy of that. And I think one of the psychological takeaway from Stoicism is that it's actually good to see yourself, like what I've said, see yourself as a target, as someone who's capable of self-empowerment, rather than just, wallowing on self-pity. And I think that's a lovely message to communicate, especially to young people. But what I would like to ask you now, Dr. Irvine, is that are there any emerging trends in psychology or philosophy that you're excited about?
There's psychology is really interesting, because it's been since like 1970, 1980 that people like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky have come up with some really great insights into the way the human mind works. And if you read the Stoics and then read them, you realize, you know what, they were just kind of figuring out and putting into very formal terms some of the insights that the Stoics discovered, 2 millennia ago. So they're coming up with all of this stuff about how the mind works. And the mind is this truly complex organism. And you think, well, we're all rational beings. Well, we have a rational component in our brain, but we have other sub-rational components. We have them because of our evolutionary past. We're wired to want things that would have been good to have way back on the savannas of Africa 200,000 years ago. If you had these traits, good for you. You got fed, you mated, you did everything else. One of them, for instance, was status within whatever tribe or group you were you're in. Back in those ancient times in your evolutionary past, if you were a solitary individual, you were dead. You didn't find food, you didn't mate. A tiger or a lion or some animal ate you or killed you. You needed friends. And you needed, among those friends, you needed a level of status too. So we're still wired, except we have the internet now.
Mhm.
And so you can get on the internet and you can show me, hey, guess what? I've got 2012 followers right now. And isn't that great? And I'm wonderful. I'm thinking, well, the reason you care about that so much is because of wiring that was suited for 200,000 years ago and would have made a difference in your life, would have helped you survive and reproduce. But now it's possible of making you spend your days chasing that level of popularity. And now that it's quantified, I mean, you can get miserable. I lost 7 followers yesterday. What did I do wrong? Yeah, so there's a lot of insights. Current book I'm writing on I'm working on is critical thinking. So I'm taking this, I mentioned, I think I mentioned this, that the Stoics were logicians as well. And so this whole notion about how we come to the beliefs that we do, and there is a rational component to it, but there's this really large irrational component. And so my question is, how can you be a critical thinker and at the same time keep an open mind? There's a lot of really closed-minded people around us now, and when they hear somebody saying something they don't want to hear, they shout them down, and that's a shame.
That's a very lovely book. Definitely something to watch out for. So do keep us updated if you have that book already available.
Okay.
My question for you now, Dr. Irvine, is that as a Stoic, what's your advice for aging well?
For aging well, yeah, it's an interesting thing because I'm going through it right now. I mentioned that I was going to retire at the end of this year. Doesn't mean I'll stop working, stop doing things. Life has its stages, and one of the interesting things about getting old is stuff stops working. I used to be able to almost dunk a basketball. Now, no, no way. So all sorts of things go away. But I think I'm as comfortable in my own skin as I've ever been in my life, and that's wonderful. When you're a teenager, just all of these fears and hopes and these doubts you have about yourself. Well, I know who I am now, and I'm happy with who I am. Another interesting thing that happens is we talked about desires and the way they arise in you and the role they play in your life. Tell you what, if you're a 15-year-old, you're subject to all sorts of desires, sexual desires, other desires. If you're 30 years old, you're subject to a bunch of desires about, for instance, social standing, desires about what you've got, what kind of visible wealth you've got, and what you want. The desires changes as you get older. And they become less intense. And you might say, gee, I want to be intensely desiring things. And then now that I'm moving toward the other end of the spectrum, I'd say, no, you don't. Because it's nice to just feel, I like who I am. I like what I'm doing. And I don't want to go, but I'm ready to go in some sense. I've done the important things in life. I've had the important human experiences.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Irvine, who inspires you both professionally and personally?
Right now, if I had to name one name, it would be Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher. He's my favorite of the Roman Stoics. And I find myself during the day when I've got a difficult decision to make of thinking, what would Seneca do under these circumstances? So I would give somebody long gone. I do have any number of what I call mentors. I grant a human being mentor status, but usually it's limited where it becomes clear to me that they know a whole lot more about something than I do. And then when they talk, I don't argue with them. I just take notes. I just write down what they're saying. Usually I don't reveal to them that I've given them this mentor status because, there's a danger that they will take it and it will go to their head or whatever. But so, yeah, I have a bunch of limited mentors. Right now, my big mentor would be Seneca.
Brilliant. And how do you relax? What's your distressing outlet?
How do I relax? Let's see. Just before we did this interview, I went out and did. I'm a rower, more precisely. I'm a sculler. That's the person who uses two oars. Just went out for a long row at sunrise on a nearby river. So it's both relaxation, but it's interesting because it also stretches your comfort zone. It expands your comfort zone. Because I could be just lying in bed, but I'm not. I'm out there doing something interesting. Something with a little element of danger because the boat can turn over. Things can happen. And I have a very wonderful wife who helps me. Yeah, I wouldn't regard myself as having a particularly stressful life. And, when I do, I regard it as a challenge. And so step one is, okay, how can I overcome this challenge? And step two is, and how can I avoid, instead of letting it upset me, how can I come out of it feeling good about myself for having overcome that? And I think that's very good at dealing with stress.
You're definitely a Stoic, Dr. Irvine.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, can you recommend sources and events for Stoicism for anyone who wants to explore more about this field?
Anybody who wants to explore Stoicism, you were born at the right time because you're in the midst of Stoic Renaissance. So when I wrote Guide to the Good Life, 2008, there were, as I think I said before, a few Stoics around and a few Stoic books around. Lots of books written by the Stoics and lots of academic treatises on the Stoics, but Stoicism for general audiences, that it was hard to find books for that. They were out there. That has just turned absolutely around. And so I did a check on Amazon. New Stoic books are coming out at more than one per day. Which is astonishing. So we've got a lot of stuff. And if you go online, well, if you went on YouTube and typed Stoic, you've got like 2 years worth of viewing that's going to follow on that. Anybody who also wants to, I encourage them to take a look at my website, William B as in boy, Irvine, williambirvine.com. Because I give you a lot of stuff to read, just stuff to read. You can certainly watch other talks that I've given. And I point you to different sources. But like I say, you're living in the Stoic Renaissance. There's a ton of books out there. There's the Stoicon, Stoic Convention, at which I gave a talk, I think last fall. Yeah, so boy, the world is your oyster, if you're an up-and-coming Stoic.
Okay, so I'll also include a link to your website so people can get to know those, especially the convention for Stoics. What's the most important thing you want people to know about you and the work that you do? What's the big message from Dr. Irvine?
I'm a teacher. And the whole point to what I do is I am a very curious fellow in at least two senses of the word, but I'm curious. I want to know things. I want to learn things. So I like to think. I like to learn. And then after I've learned about something, then the next thing is I want to share with people the things I found out. Thinking it can be socially useful. Maybe they will be interested as well. So, you can describe me as all sorts of things, but my number one self-description would be I'm a teacher. And character traits, I'm a curious fellow.
And what's your professional dream? I know you really try to resist on, like elevating your desires, but what's your professional dream?
Let's see. So my professional dream would have been to change people's lives in some way. And I suspect I've done that in the case of some of my students. But the books, and in particular Guide to the Good Life, judging from the kind of mail that I get, has had an impact on many people's lives. So I don't have a professional dream. I would say that I've been remarkably lucky that some of the things I wanted to accomplish, I've made good inroads on accomplishing them. So, and that's a wonderful feeling to have.
Absolutely. And what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a philosopher or as a teacher?
The exit plan would have been to head for finance. So I have a very big interest in finance, and I've been an investor since fourth grade. Back a long time ago. So that strikes people as an odd combination. I actually had two majors in college, so I got a degree in both math and philosophy. So the math part is alive and kicking in me, within me, and it could have come in use if I was interested in finance. The other thing about finance is it's all about human psychology. Once again, so that for me, if I had it to do over again, maybe I should have become a psychologist instead of a philosopher. So in philosophy right now, I would regard myself in the books I write as it's half philosophy and half psychology. I'm treading, both paths at the same time, and I find that they join together nicely. They complement each other.
Absolutely. Well, the idea of Stoicism actually overlaps with resilience, and I'm particularly interested in resilience because I'm doing a PhD, and my research project is about resilience. And
Oh, good.
I could really feel that there's an overlap between Stoicism and positive psychology. Now, finally, Dr. Irvine, what else is in the pipeline? Remind us again of your books and your upcoming events. And I know that people can get in touch with you through your website, but if by any chance are you on social media, or you're just completely gone off that platform?
Yeah, so I've got the one website, but I'm not on anything else. I am reachable by email, and if you go on the website, there is a contact thing you can do, and I'm very good, not 100%, but in high 90% in responding to the sorts of things people send me, and yeah. So let's see. That's if you want to get in touch, that's what you can do. Right now, last year, my calendar was packed, so I did by my count in calendar year last year 30 different Zoom interviews, things of that sort, and it was all pandemic related. So there were people who were very interested in what would the Stoics do in a pandemic like this. But the calendar this year, for better or worse, is a lot less crowded, and so we'll see how that changes. But anybody who's interested in seeing talks I've done, most of them are listed on the website.
Okay. Well, Dr. William Irvine, it's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show, but unfortunately our time is up. I look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.